Hello guys, welcome back again to this wonderful day. Remember, we are looking at how government works mostly. That's the political side of the government. Now, the question for us today is about protest. What role do protests play in any government? Because most recently I've been looking at the democratic states, but today, one thing with this demonstration we're going to look at protests are something that are held even to other types of government. Now, we want to know what are protests, what is the role of protest, and why are they legalized or allowed in any government? Number one, I'm going to answer that questions, we have to know what is the meaning of protest, or some others call it demonstrations, one and the same thing. Now, demonstrations or protests is a public expression of objection, disapproval, or dissent towards an idea, an action, mostly politics. It's an influence. It is there to influence a public opinion or a government policy so that they can enact what they want themselves. Mostly, number one, these protests have led to we have different types of protests. We have a civil protest, we have human rights demonstrations. These are a way or is an avenue to ensure that the government listens to its people. Remember, in any government, mostly a democratic government, we have different ways of ensuring that people's consent are heard. That's number one, by electing representatives who are going to put our grievances in the parliament. Now, at sometimes in the democratic state, we have two types of people. We have the opposition and we have what we call the ruling. Now, the oppositions, they act as a watchdog for the ruling party, because number one, with leadership, or with one thing with power, is that it tends to control people. You know, when you give man power without control, it tends to be more of very, very pride, doesn't listen. That's where you find where there's not counter checking, that's where dictatorship starts. That's why we have the three arms of government to each assist and ensure that we are able to have a stable government. Now, why should the government regulate? Why should government why should government allow protests? Why should it be constitutionalized? You know, one why should the government allows protest is because it's sometimes one way of listening to people. Is number one is they don't have an option. For example, you see the America, they have had many protests. I'm going to give an example of a protest which were done mostly during this particular guy, the last emperor of Russia. Mostly at that time was called the Soviet Union. Now, the reason as to why I'm focusing on this is because his leadership is marked with a lot of revolution, and most revolutions are are, are facilitated by what we call demonstrations. And these demonstrations, they sometimes the reason as to why government regulates, because some demonstrations are destructive and some demonstrations do not bring what we call the common good of the people. So, and some are maybe for a specific group of people. So that's why sometimes when protests do not work, people try to resent to riots. And those riots, for example, the bloody Sunday in the Russia during the Tsar, is one which was very, very tragic, and it made people lose a lot of life. For us to have that last Tsar, it was a result of demonstrations. The next thing we're going to look about demonstrations to ask, can we as Kenyans have a peaceful demonstration work? Can a peaceful demonstration work in Kenya? Now, why am I saying can we have a peaceful demonstration? Because most demonstrations in Kenya are marked by looting, loss of property, stealing. There's a lot of chaos when we do demonstrations. Why? or is it that people take advantage? Now, number one, we say that protests are there to ensure that the government listens to the public, because that's one way in which we can keep the government in check if you're not satisfied. When some this mostly initiated by those who are in charge, maybe the opposition leaders. Why? For example, recently, last year that is, we had demonstrations. When did these demonstrations turn to riots? What led to that? Okay, before that, what led to these demonstrations? We had this Kenya Council government. It was new in government, less than a year, and with this Kenya Council government, it had its manifesto which it was trying to implement. Remember, they said they were not taking loans, so they had to know or to create more avenues where they could get their money. So, because of this, they come up with these ideas which some of them were not supported by the opposition. So remember, anytime you want to bring a change, then you have to present it in government as a bill, and for it to pass, for example, it has to be supported by two-thirds of the members of parliament. That means that for you, if it has been brought by the government or oppositions, you have to have the numbers. That's why you find whenever you do an election, that's why it's a requirement by law that the government that takes has to have a majority of representatives, because this majority are the one responsible of implementing these new bills that were in manifestos of the government. Now, the, the next thing we are going to look, remember there were these bills that were introduced, they were passed, they were just a lot of promotion that some people were bought out so that they can promote these bills. As Mio tried to counter check or to counter to try and eliminate the possibility of those bills being passed, but they had no numbers. So they tried to rally around, have these showgrounds to try and say why they are not feeling it's right for these bills to be passed, but it falls on deaf ears, because even if you're objecting these changes that are being implemented and you don't have numbers in parliament, you can do nothing. So what was the next step? Because they were telling the government, they were trying to talk, but they could not listen. What was their next tool that they could use to ensure that the government did not proceed with implementing these bills? Now, that's when the leader of opposition, Raila Amolo Odinga, decided to mobilize people so that they can demonstrate. And remember, he used to say, we are demonstrating peacefully. And they used to do that. But remember, with any demonstration, sometimes people might take advantage. When you're demonstrating, some people may decide to take advantage of that demonstration to steal. So that's why police are put there. But we are told that the police are the one who triggered those who are demonstrating peacefully. So that's according to how they claim. That's when it transitioned from demonstrations to riots. Now let's focus to the next thing. Why is demonstrations or protest held as the most powerful weapon in which the government can listen to people? Number one, when demonstrations are there, mostly in Kenya, it tends to bring a lot of it tries to maybe put an economy in a bad position, because number one, when demonstrations are led mostly in Nairobi Central, or Nairobi as a whole, Kenya as a country, businesses stops. Remember, war or political instability is not good for any political for any country, and the government has to listen, because number one, each time people demonstrate, people do not open businesses. Each time demonstrations do not operate, remember, many things come to a standstill. With political instability, nothing can continue. That's why the government sometimes tend to listen or to get what people say, so that they can try not to lose a lot economically and also maybe so that they can enable to have a good environment where investors will invest and get more currencies. Thank you. That was my insight. If you want maybe for us to look at the next part, you can comment. Please subscribe, share. Thank you.